Welcome to Guy Shrink. I'm Bill Roman, host here at Guy Shrink. I'm with my producer and compatriots and partners in crime, Jordan Valdiviez, who's on assignment, and Keegan Berner, who's here in beautiful Glass City, Toledo, Ohio. We're at Cogito Studios. Today my guest is a longtime friend. We went to school together like 50 years ago. Brent Bill is a prolific author, a Quaker, theologian, philosopher, and he's written, as I said, prolific author, written a tremendous amount of books, got great insight. And today we're going to talk about golf as a spiritual practice. So as I begin every conversation, Brent, with the same question, what keeps you awake at night?
Oh, all kinds of things keep me awake at night, depending on what I watched on television before I went to bed or whatever book I'm reading. But certainly, one of those things is, so what was my day like? Did I live up to what the person I hope to be? So kind of doing the prayer of examine that the Jesuits, St. Ignatius started, just a reflection on the day. And so how am I doing is a question. Was I a little bit better today than I was yesterday as far as living up to the person I think I'm created to be?
Yeah, you said St. Ignatius. That reminds me of the Jesuits, kind of like, Christianity, only tougher.
Yeah. Pretty serious
hard
about it, especially compared to us Quakers.
Well, you recently have published a book entitled Beauty, Truth, Love, Life and Love. And we were just talking before the show about how you use that as a kind of a criteria of decision making. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. One of the reasons I wrote the book was, actually, I'd been invited to by a group of Quakers in just south of Toledo to come speak to them at their annual sessions. And they had read my book, Sacred Compass, about spiritual discernment. And they said, well, this is 4 years later. Have you learned anything else since then? It's like, well, I hope I have. But one of the things I had learned is, even though I'd written that book on spiritual discernment about, what to do with and to see life as a pilgrimage, not a how-to, but life as a pilgrimage, was what have I learned since then that I really use? And I had been doing a lot of reflection on my life at that time, and I noticed when things went well, or what I considered well, 4 elements were present. And that was beauty, truth, life, and love. And when things didn't go so well, whether it be my job or relationship or whatever, one or more of those things was missing from it. And so as I spoke about that, I began to develop this kind of test that I use now. And, just real briefly, when I'm confronted with a decision in a relationship or a job or a committee opportunity to serve, I always ask, will this give me the opportunity to create beauty, or will it create something beautiful by my being in it? Also, is it true to who I am? So the truth in here doesn't necessarily mean the big truth as far as biblical truth or Socrates, what is truth? But is it true in the sense that it aligns with where I am in my life, and it fits just right? And then life, is this going to be life-giving or life-draining? Doesn't mean is it going to be hard or easy. It's just, I can be on a very easy committee and have it just suck the life out of me because feels like a waste of time. So Is it going to create life? And then the big question is this coming from a place of love in my life? Because I'd really love to do this, or I really have a love for this work or whatever, as opposed to obligation or duty, or I should, or a nominating committee asked me sort of thing. So I try and make sure all four of those things are present as a guide for my life in throughout all of my life at this point.
Well, these are really great criteria to make decisions about what do I need to do, what do I want to do in this situation. How do I want to accept this invitation to do something? And because we don't usually think in terms of these kinds of categories in making these kinds of decisions about what I want to do. And while you and I kind of laughed at golf as spiritual practice, I really want to talk today about spiritual practices for men, because that isn't spoken about a lot without either going into some kind of philosophical playground or some kind of religious mumbo jumbo. And so you've articulated these four criteria very clearly. And one of the things I remember you and I talked about earlier was the importance of an activity. That's why we got golf as a spiritual practice. So what is there about golf that makes it a spiritual practice?
Well, I think it depends on the person.
Yeah, but that's true.
It could probably be a spiritual practice or destruction of the spirit. But I think, one of the things that I've found for me is it gets me out of my head, where I live too much. And the whole idea of activity, physical activity, I think helps men reconnect with something primal, whether it be chopping wood or playing golf, which are, of course, two different extremes. I can't chop wood like I used to, but I can still play golf as badly as I ever did.
That's good.
So to get out and have the occasional exquisite shot, the just right, especially as the old guy who's playing with my son-in-laws or grandsons, and to sink the putt that they all missed or whatever. There's a feeling of accomplishment. It's like I am in community with them while I'm doing it at the same time. And so it's not just an isolated sort of thing. It helps me connect with the ground literally when I'm walking, but grounded in things that are important to me, like my friendships and my family. And so and it renews my soul. the few really good shots or whatever that time, or just the time with my family, even if our team comes in last. And we have an annual family golf outing on Memorial Day weekend. It's called the 18 before the 500, because we live in Indianapolis and are outside, and everybody except me goes to the race still these days. And so we have this big family outing with a lunch, and everybody's playing golf, and we may come in last, but we're all together and we're doing this and having a good time and joking. And I come home, I'm tired, but my spirit feels somehow reconnected with all of them and with myself in a way that I didn't before I left.
Well, that activity idea is so important, and doing it, two things that stand out in that, what you just said about being connected to the ground and being connected into community, kind of having a place of steadiness, and then being able to relate to other people. And you used in the analogy of golfing, this teaches me how to deal with error.
Yeah, because there's so much of it.
Spiritual practice is about dealing with error.
It is a spiritual practice. It's like we are not going to arrive at perfection in this life. Nor do I expect to. And we can either beat ourselves up about that, or we can enjoy which is part of the what keeps me up at night when I look back. I have the choice of beating myself up over those shortcomings, maybe the harsh word that I spoke that I shouldn't have or whatever, or try and rejoice in the things that I did right and just endeavor to make sure I don't get in the sand trap of harsh words again.
I like that, the sand trap. That reminds me about baseball. Baseball is the only sport that really counts error.
Yeah.
It's part of the game. Screw ups, mess ups, whatever you want to call it. I mean, you get runs, hits, runs, and big E out there on the scoreboard.
Yeah, it's just expected that you're going to have errors.
Right. It's expected.
Yeah. Especially when I played baseball. My sister always felt she was the scorekeeper for our team, so she was pretty confident that there'd be errors under my name.
Okay. So what you're talking about, articulating a spirituality for men that's got some kind of activity involved in it, doing some kind of chopping wood is a great idea, and also making room for mistakes, errors, know that it's going to happen, and how I'm able to manage myself in the management of my mess ups is an important piece of this.
And I think the thing is too, that when we think of spiritual practices, we think of a set sort of thing like the Ignatian exercises, which many of them I find helpful, or other sorts of practices that guide us, but we rarely think of the question, how is this going to feed my soul? Mm-hmm. A friend of mine, the late Phyllis Tickle, who wrote a lot about faith, she wrote some wonderful books on praying the hours. And I am a Quaker. We don't have liturgy and all that sort of stuff. But I tried to pray the hours, and it didn't work for me. That was just not who I was. Mm-hmm. And even to take it a step back from an overtly religious practice like praying the hours, I think the question has to be, what's going to feed my soul? Golf is one of those things that does for me. Chopping wood, not quite as much. I like having the wood chopped and helping split the wood for the fireplace. But my son-in-law, on the other hand, he loves that sort of stuff, as did my father. And so Michael is always out working in the woods with the log splitter or the chainsaw. And my daughter doesn't get it sometimes. But Mike is a trained CPA. He lives his life in numbers at a major company in the United States. And this reconnects him to the ground, literally, but it also is his spiritual time away. I don't know that he would describe it that way, but I see it. I mean, the other day, they were harvesting the cornfield next to us, and Mike took his grandkids out to watch them. And next thing they knew, the farmer, our friend Doug, had invited them all up into the combine, and they rode around. And Mike came back with the biggest smile on his face, and he goes, "I'm retiring in 2 years. I'm going to ask Doug if he can use the help."
Yeah, right. I mean, because what's that combine have? A 40-foot stretch, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. Just
yeah,
it's
he uses big
GPS to turn the field, and then it steers itself as it goes through down the rows.
Yeah. There's a boy, they found a new toy. That's for sure. Exactly, but I like the idea about feeding my soul, and that's something that we don't think about. Is this going to feed me? This is different than make me feel good, but is this going to feed the depths of who I really am? So that means I got to be in touch with the depths of who I really am.
Yeah, which we're much better at as kids, I think. Mm-hmm. We use more imagination, and we look for things that fulfill our dreams. We have these dreams. And then as we get into adult life, we perhaps we're too much like Paul in saying we put away foolish things. Well, perhaps they weren't all foolish. And so we begin to stop doing the things that feed our soul. And I mean, I know so many guys who never had hobbies or anything. They just had work. And then when they retired or whatever, they either went nuts or died.
Yes. Yeah, those are the two options. Right. Right. I did nothing to feed my soul all those years. And of course, I quit work, and the next day they replaced me with somebody else. They didn't even notice I'm gone.
Yeah, exactly. Or so they didn't replace me, which is even worse.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, right.
Like, what good did I do there?
Yeah, right. So one of the things in golfing is spiritual practice. We'll just say that about dealing with error. Another piece of that, I think, has to do with being aware of, you called them blind moments. In this conversation we had earlier, you called them blind moments. Could you say more about what that might be? What's a blind moment about?
Well, there's just so much around us that we don't notice. We get so self-focused, I would say. It's a kind of reverse mindfulness. Instead of being mindful about what's going on and aware, we just get, I'll mostly speak for myself. I can get so zoned in on what I'm doing in that moment, especially when I was at work, that I didn't hear other things around me or see other things around me. And so I was blind in many ways to life happening all around me. And so I tried to develop on my commute into Indianapolis every day, which was a little more than a half an hour, different mindfulness practices that I could begin to notice the world around me. And just, there was so much I missed from the beauty of the skyline, which I grew up a city boy, even though I live in the country now. And I always enjoyed city skylines. But, it just became something I didn't even notice. New buildings or the changing of the seasons and the light against those buildings, down to a bag boy at the grocery store next to our office, the only downtown grocery store at that time, named Roger. And Roger just seemed very interesting. He was probably on the autism spectrum. He was probably about my age, but he would want to chat occasionally, and I'd be too busy to do that, not even noticing his humanity. And when I stopped and did, we ended up being friends. Mm-hmm. And he even came to one of my book signings one time when I was downtown, after he had handwritten a Daniel Defoe story about the Quaker and the ham.
Wow.
That he thought I should know that story as a Quaker. And he wanted to talk about what the meaning of it was.
Wow. So, wow. You're saying it's important to do some deliberate practice to keep my mind aware of what's going on, and maybe taking a different route to go to work occasionally, and instead of the same freeway, the same train or whatever, doing something differently to get to work.
Instead of Interstate 70, I'd take Route 40. Okay. In through town, the old national road.
Yeah.
Just to go through the neighborhoods that once were white, middle class, working people, and now are Hispanic.
Yes.
What's going on in my community?
Yeah. As you were talking about city skylines and the seasons and sunlight, it reminded me of the great French painter Claude Monet, and how he has several, perhaps maybe hundreds of pictures of the same article. I mean, like Reims Cathedral or something, in different views of sunlight.
Yes.
This and how every time he would paint a new painting in a different sunlight, the painting would be different, even though the subject looked the same, the object, but the subject was different because the sunlight hit it differently. And becoming aware of that is a spiritual practice.
Well, Quakers are really big on what they say, minding the light. Using light as a metaphor for the Holy Spirit of Christ within. But this whole idea of in one of my early books was titled "Mind the Light," but this idea of how light impacts us and paying attention to it. As a photographer, and you're one who helped nurture that when I was at college by putting up with me as the photo editor of or a photographer at the school paper. I reach over, and right here is my camera still.
Ah, yes. A real camera.
A real camera. But it taught me to pay attention. Using a camera was one of my spiritual practices early on, even though I didn't think of it that way, because it helped me see light. It helped me see how light changed the subject of what I was taking pictures of. It helped me look for beauty also. How can I take this and make it a piece that will have somebody look at it like a piece of art and go, aha, there's something there. There's a story that's being told. And how does that feed my spirit or not? Just like Manet and Monet and all their working with light. I mean, it's just amazing. You go to the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. and watch how painters use light through the world. And we don't pay attention to light like people do because we have all this artificial light around us. And yet our forebears lived by light.
Yes. I think of the great painter Caravaggio and a student of his, Latour, and how their paintings always had a light in the painting that illumined the subject of which they were painting. A remarkable technique. Yeah, Caravaggio stuff is just absolutely fabulous.
I don't think we have a connection with light or recognize it like folks used to, because we can control light so much nowadays. And so we don't appreciate its effect on us or our ability even to see things in different kinds of lights that we wouldn't otherwise.
So you're really talking about bringing light into our blind moments. Because blindness, of course, is darkness, and bringing light. And there's some deliberate things we can do to widen our horizon of paying attention.
Yeah.
You said nothing beats practice. So find a couple of things that do that for you and keep it up and see what happens.
And those may change during the seasons of your life too. It's there are some things that I used to do that were really helpful, and now I don't do them as much. But photography has been a constant for me, as has writing, which is something I've done wherever I lived. And for somebody else, it might be something completely different. My dad, who passed away 4 years ago, one of his ways of feeding his soul was doing a baseball lineup, for the teams that he managed, and it was
okay.
He found a lot of beauty, truth, life, and love in that, in putting the right people in the right positions to do a winning combination. And I mean, he just found joy in that. Or
that's real art right there. Yeah.
A basketball trophy sitting on my desk, one of the few trophies I ever helped win for a team that my dad managed, that I I sat mostly on the bench, but he put this great team together and we won the whole league. I was a designated fouler, I think.
There comes that error again,
We'll put him in because he's so clumsy. He'll foul the guy trying to shoot, but it'll mess up the shot, so that'll help us.
Okay. You talked about how important work is, and doing something that feeds your soul. What is that about for you? What do you think that's about?
Well, I think it's way too easy for men in our society, and I don't think this is anything new, but to measure our worth as a person by our productivity, and then all of a sudden find ourselves stuck in a job that we is not feeding our soul, but we don't know how to leave it because we've never even asked that question. Is there something else I could do that would really feed my soul if I could just walk away from this one, or was willing to? And in my own life, that's happened because I was, in a fairly major position as the vice president of a large not-for-profit in Indianapolis. And for 9 years, it was great. And I loved it. But the last few, it had ceased to be fun. It had ceased to feed my soul. I found myself making more stupid errors. I found myself in the morning not wanting to make the drive into town. And this was, of course, pre-pandemic, so I didn't have a choice of working at home. Technology wasn't that advanced, whatever. But I didn't have quite I had not given myself the permission to leave because, for one, I love the money and I love the prestige, and I did value my soul as much as I should have. And when I look back on that, I think it was not life-giving for me or the organization for me to be there. It was a good thing for them for me to leave, because then they could bring somebody in with new energy or whatever. And then I went to a position that I just loved. And it was the position I held till I retired. But that's so hard for us men to do, to walk away and say, I've got the security, I've got my family, you do all these other sort of thinkings instead of saying, so what is feeding my soul? Can I go do a job that I would really love? And, that's a hard question, because if we have family obligations and so forth, we certainly have to keep those in mind. But if we have to be stuck in a job that doesn't much feed our soul, what can we do outside of that job that does feed our soul so that we can go on doing the work that needs to be done?
Yeah, that's a good example of how your four criteria of beauty, truth, life, and love can get actualized in the decision to leave a position and go to somewhere else where my soul is getting fed.
I mentioned earlier that I've been asked to give this speech to this group of Quakers about this topic, and it was either ironic or God jokester self coming through. But 2 months, a month before I was to give this talk, I then left that position that I'd been in.
Oh, really?
Okay. And so it was like, and now I had to find a new position. And offers were coming my way from other not-for-profits and stuff, since they knew, like, Brent's available now. Let's see if we can get him. And it was like, okay, now I'm going to go give this speech on how I need to be we all need to be guided by beauty, truth, life, and love. Are you really going to practice this, Brent, as you find a new position, or are you just paying lip service to it? And it was kind of scary to turn down positions that were paying really well and stuff. But I decided, no, I'm going to see if this works. I believe this is true. I believe this is the way to go in decision making. And so what I did then, a position I didn't even know about in a city I had no intention of working from, out in Philadelphia, came along, that would allow me to work remotely and go into the office one week a month. And it was exactly things I'd been writing about, and so forth. This position offered me the chance to put into practice.
That's amazing. That really is. And these kinds of things happen to us, but you were open for that possibility to have happened. I mean, you kind of readied yourself, kind of like, pay attention to what your soul is telling you.
Yeah.
You've said that before, as you and I have talked on other occasions. And I think about this piece that I've picked up recently in a workshop I'm doing with Ira Progoff's material. To what is my life calling me at this moment?
Yeah. And it is that sense of vocation, vocare, to be called. And we often think of that in terms of those of us who know that phrase, or we think of it in terms of pastoral calls or those kind of things. And yet it's so much broader than that. It's, what is the call in my life to do? And, one of my main calls is writing, but every position I've had has had a vocational aspect to it, but they also furthered my ability to write. They gave me space to write and learn the craft. And so,
could you say a little bit more about becoming a writer? I mean, you didn't. Yeah, yes, you didn't wake up one day and say, "I'm going to write." So, could you tell us a little bit about becoming a writer? Because writing is a spiritual practice.
Yeah. Well, I didn't wake up one day saying I'm going to be a writer, but I did from when I was pretty young, thinking I wanted to be a writer because I was an inveterate reader. I said I was raised in one of two places, the Highland Avenue Friends Church or the Hiltonia branch of the Columbus Public Library. That's just both those places where I spent my non-school time. So I was always reading all kinds of things, and especially James Thurber when I was young. He was a Columbus native. So
Columbus person, yeah.
I wanted to be a James Thurber-esque writer, and even though I'm extremely humorous, I'm not that good at writing. But it was something I wanted to do because I thought those people were really smart. As I got older, I realized they weren't that smart at all, but they had learned the craft, and they were intellectually curious about a lot of things, and wanting to. And I was always intellectually curious. That's why I was such a bad student my first year in college, is because it was so much more intellectually fulfilling to learn to work in the dark room than to sit through English 101. And those were lessons that stuck with me. And so the writing just started happening when I began to talk with friends about things that were really important. I had a really good mentor at Wilmington College, where I graduated, named T. Canby Jones, and he used to write on my papers, "You're a really good writer. You should do this." And so I started submitting little articles and book reviews, and then began writing books about subjects that interested me or I wanted to learn more about. And almost all my, especially recent books in the last 15 years, 17 years, almost 20 now, have been about subjects that I needed to explore more, that I wanted to learn more about. And so I find it a true spiritual practice for me, because it gets at the deepest questions that I'm wrestling with, and then going, so what do you think about that? And not just what you think, but are you going to stake your life on this, in a sense? Are you going to live this way?
Mm-hmm. 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 It's kind of like that speech you gave to that Quaker group, and then all of a sudden you find yourself, golly, I'm actually practicing beauty, truth, life, and love here.
Yeah, or I better.
Yeah, right.
If I don't, I'll go, now, wait a second. You told us, and
right,
you're not in keeping with the Quaker testimony of integrity, young man.
Yeah, more than just a nice idea. So, so we're talking about crafting a man's spirituality, because we all have a spirit. That's all there is to it. And what we do, I think the Christian philosopher Dallas Willard says, everyone has spiritual formation because everyone has a spirit. Whether you acknowledge it or not is not the issue. It's just knowing it's there, and what you do with it makes all the difference in the world of how you live your life. And we've been talking about making room for error and paying attention, letting light in our blind spots. And it kind of bring this to a close. You did make a mention of a Norman Rockwell painting about spirituality, and we'll put that on our website so people can take a look at what that's about. But could you say a little bit more about why that painting was so intriguing for you in the idea of spiritual formation?
Well, it's titled Sunday Morning, Easter, 1959, and it is this wonderful illustration that he did for the Saturday Evening Post. But I mean, it's a great piece of Americana, and it is very 1959-ish. But it's very cool, because it is a mother, 2 daughters, and a son, all dressed up, and they're all in gray, ready to head to church. And the boy in the picture is probably about my age at that time in 1959. But they're in the background, sort of, and they are marching in lockstep. If you look, they're in step. And they've got their Bibles, and the girls have their white gloves and hats like the mother does, just like we used to dress up on Easter. And right in front of them is a lovely, one of the big 50s Eames chairs, and slouched in it is this father in his pajamas and robe, and the newspaper, Sunday papers scattered all around him. He's holding some. He's got a cigarette, and the smoke's not even going up straight. It's kind of slouching around too. And the mother and the daughters are not looking at this guy. They're in lockstep heading out. But the little boy is looking over at the father. And I used to see that painting every day when I was when I worked at the not-for-profit downtown. Because it hung on one of the walls. And more and more, I thought it was on the wall in the men's room, of all things. It was a religious not-for-profit.
That's prophetic.
I'd stand there and look at that, and I'd think, okay, now whose souls are being fed by what?
Yeah.
And the mother is obviously displeased with the father. And so she's going because this is religious obligation. It was the 50s when you were expected, but it's religious obligation, and heading in lockstep to hear somebody talk about God, to hear a choir sing about God, to do hymns, whatever. And the father, I always imagined him Because I'm a Midwest boy, so I have glamorous views of the East Coast. But I'd imagine this guy is somebody who lived in Connecticut, across from New York City, and took a train in every day, an hour or so to work, worked hard, came back, and Saturday he'd worked all day on the yard in suburbia and everything. And Sunday's is my day of rest, and I'm going to do it.
Yes.
And so he is actually feeding his soul in a way that is important to him. And then the little boy is looking at him, and I've always wondered, is that condemnation on his face or wistfulness, thinking, I'd like to be sitting on the floor next to you with my Cheerios and reading the funnies as opposed to this.
Yeah.
So what feeds our souls?
Wow. Great picture as you're talking about, and just great mental picture as you were talking about what feeds my soul, and lockstep or wistful thinking. Wow. Well, Brent Bill, what an honor to have you here on Guy Shrink.
The honor is mine.
Well, thank you.
You were one of my heroes as a freshman. A nice junior who had it all together.
Yeah, right. Little did you know.
Little
right?
did I know. Well, you're still one of my heroes, so I'm glad we're still friends after all these years.
Absolutely. Well, the enduring thing, the enduring capacity of friendship. So thank you for being on Guy Shrink. Really appreciate it. We talked about men's spiritual practices, men's spirituality, about having some practices that feed your soul, about paying attention to where you're at in life, even if it's driving the car, and working on your golf game and chopping wood. Okay. Well, thanks for being here, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks.
Sounds great.
Okay.